The gunshot that rang out across the dusty main street of Redemption, Texas, that scorching July afternoon in 1882, was meant for someone else entirely. But it changed everything for Sarah Mitchell when the cowboy named James Thornton threw himself in front of her without a second thought. Sarah had arrived in Redemption 3 months earlier, a widow at 22 with nothing but a worn carpetbag and a determination to start fresh after losing her husband to cholera back in Missouri. The small cattle town nestled in the Texas plains offered her a position as a cook and housekeeper at the Double R Ranch, where a crew of 15 cowboys worked the sprawling property owned by retired cattle baron Robert Richardson. The work was hard the days long, but Sarah threw herself into it with a quiet intensity that made the other ranch hands respect her, even if they barely knew her. James Thornton had been working the Double R for 5 years, ever since he drifted into town at 19 with nothing but his horse, his saddle, and a skill with cattle that impressed even the most seasoned ranchers. At 24, he was one of the younger hands, but his easy smile and steady nature had earned him the trust of every man on the ranch. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and hazel eyes that seemed to notice everything, even when he pretended not to be paying attention. The incident that brought them together happened when Sarah made her weekly trip into town for supplies. She had just stepped out of the general store when 2 drunk ranch hands from a neighboring property started shooting at each other over a card game dispute. The wild shot went wide, heading straight for where Sarah stood frozen on the wooden boardwalk. James, who had been loading feed onto a wagon across the street, saw the danger in a heartbeat. He launched himself forward, grabbing Sarah and pulling her down just as the bullet splintered the post where her head had been seconds before. They landed in a tangle of limbs and petticoats in the dusty street, James shielding her body with his own until the sheriff arrived and hauled the fighting men away. When he finally pulled back to look at her, his heart hammered not from the danger but from the way her dark eyes met his with a mixture of shock and gratitude. "Are you hurt, ma'am?" he asked, his voice rougher than he intended. "No, you saved my life," Sarah whispered, still trembling. "Just doing what any decent man would do," James replied, helping her to her feet and carefully brushing the dust from her dark blue dress with more gentleness than she expected. His hands were calloused and strong, but his touch was careful, respectful. That evening, when Sarah served supper to the ranch hands in the long dining hall attached to the main house, she noticed James watching her with a thoughtful expression. She had grown accustomed to the routine of feeding the men, always waiting until every plate was filled and every cowboy was eating before she would take her own small portion and eat alone in the kitchen. It was a habit born from years of being told she should serve others first, from a childhood where food was scarce and women ate last, and from a marriage where her late husband had insisted she wait on him before seeing to her own needs. James noticed her pattern that night because he was looking for her. When all the men were seated and eating their beef stew and cornbread, he saw Sarah slip back into the kitchen with an empty plate. Through the open door, he watched her finally dish out a small serving for herself, the portions noticeably smaller than what she had given everyone else. Something about the resigned way she did it, the automatic nature of putting herself last, stirred something protective in his chest. The next evening, when the men gathered for supper, James hung back. As Sarah began serving the food, ladling stew and passing biscuits, he stepped beside her at the serving table. "Let me help you with that, Miss Sarah," he said quietly, taking the ladle from her surprised hands. Before she could protest, he filled a plate with generous portions of everything, the best cuts of meat, the fluffiest biscuits, a healthy serving of the green beans she had cooked with bacon. Then he handed it to her directly. "You should eat first. You have been cooking all day." Sarah stared at the full plate in confusion. "But the men need to be fed. I always eat after." "The men can wait 2 minutes," James said firmly, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "And they will wait. Now sit down and eat while the food is hot." The other cowboys looked up at the exchange with curiosity, but when James fixed them with a meaningful look, they simply nodded and waited. Sarah, flustered and uncertain, took the plate to the small table near the kitchen door where she sometimes sat to polish silver or mend clothes. As she took her first bite of hot food, eating while it was actually fresh and warm instead of lukewarm and congealed, tears pricked at her eyes. It was such a small thing, but it felt monumental. From that day forward, James made it his mission to serve Sarah's plate first at every meal. It became a ritual between them, one that the other ranch hands quickly accepted and even supported. Some of the older cowboys started thanking Sarah more openly for her cooking, acknowledging the work she put in. But it was James who made sure she was cared for, who watched to ensure she was eating enough, who saved the best pieces of everything for her plate. The simple act opened something between them, a connection that grew stronger with each passing day. Sarah found herself looking forward to mealtimes not just because she would eat warm food, but because James would be there with his quiet strength and gentle insistence that she mattered. They began talking more, small conversations at first about the weather or the cattle or the state of the vegetable garden Sarah was cultivating behind the bunkhouse. "Why do you do it?" Sarah asked him one evening in late August as they stood outside the dining hall after supper, watching the sun paint the Texas sky in shades of orange and pink. "Why do you make sure I eat first?" James was quiet for a long moment, his shoulder almost touching hers as they leaned against the porch railing. "My mother died when I was 15, he said finally, his voice low and rough with old pain. "She spent her whole life taking care of my father and me and my 3 sisters. She always ate last, always took the smallest portions, always made sure everyone else was happy before she even thought about herself. By the time we realized she was sick, really sick, it was too late. She had worn herself down to nothing, and there was nothing left to fight with when the fever came." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "James, I'm so sorry. I swore after we buried her that I would never let another woman go hungry or put herself last if I could help it," he continued, turning to look at her directly. The fading light caught the gold flecks in his hazel eyes. "And then I saw you doing the same thing she did, and I could not stand by and watch it. You work harder than anyone on this ranch, Sarah. You deserve to eat first. You deserve to be taken care of." The words settled over her like a warm blanket, filling spaces inside her that had been cold and empty for so long. "No one has ever taken care of me like that," she whispered. "Not since my father died when I was 12. "Then they were all fools," James said fiercely, and the conviction in his voice made her believe him. Their friendship deepened as summer turned to fall. James started finding excuses to be near the kitchen during the day, offering to carry heavy pots or chop wood for the stove or help Sarah hang laundry on the line behind the house. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories of their pasts, their dreams, their fears. Sarah learned that James had left home after his mother died because his father had remarried quickly to a woman who made it clear there was no room for a nearly grown son. He had been drifting ever since, looking for a place to belong. "I think I might have found it here," he admitted one afternoon as he helped her peel apples for pie, his knife moving with practiced ease. "For the first time in years, redemption feels like home." "What changed?" Sarah asked, though her heart already knew the answer. James set down his knife and turned to face her fully, apple forgotten. "You did. You changed everything, Sarah." The air between them crackled with unspoken feelings, but before either could say more, Robert Richardson called for James to help with a problem in the north pasture, and the moment passed. But something had shifted, and they both felt it. The ranch prepared for the annual fall cattle drive in September, a massive undertaking that would take most of the men away for 3 weeks as they drove a portion of the herd to market in Fort Worth. James was expected to go, as one of the best riders and ropers on the ranch. The night before the drive was set to leave, Sarah cooked an enormous farewell supper for all the hands, a feast of roasted beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and 3 different kinds of pie. As always, James served her plate first, but this time he sat down beside her at the small table instead of joining the other men at the long table. The cowboys hooted and whistled good-naturedly, but James ignored them, his attention focused entirely on Sarah. "I am going to miss these meals," he said quietly, cutting into his beef. "I am going to miss seeing you every day." Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she set down her fork. "I will miss you too," she admitted, "more than I should probably say." James reached over and covered her hand with his, right there in front of everyone. The dining hall went quiet, all the cowboys watching with interest. "When I come back," he said, his voice steady and sure, "I would like permission to court you properly, Sarah Mitchell, if you would have me." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but these were the good kind, the kind that came from happiness instead of sorrow. "I would like that very much, James Thornton." The dining hall erupted in cheers and applause, the cowboys celebrating the match they had all seen coming for months. Even crusty old Robert Richardson, who rarely smiled, raised his coffee cup in approval from where he sat at the head of the long table. The 3 weeks James was gone felt like 3 years to Sarah. She threw herself into her work, preserving vegetables from the garden, smoking meat for the winter, cleaning every corner of the ranch house until it gleamed. But at night, lying in her small room off the kitchen, she let herself dream of a future she had never imagined possible. A future where someone put her first, where someone saw her as valuable and worthy of care. James thought about Sarah every mile of the cattle drive. He worked harder than ever, pushing the cattle, riding night watch, doing whatever needed to be done so the drive would be successful and they could get home faster. The other cowboys teased him mercilessly about being lovesick, but he did not care. He had spent 5 years drifting, never letting himself want anything or anyone. Sarah had changed that. She had made him want to build something lasting, to put down roots, to create a home. The drive was successful, the cattle bringing good prices at market. On the journey back to redemption, James rode with a small fortune in his saddlebag, his share of the profits. He had plans for that money, plans that involved a certain dark-eyed cook who had captured his heart with her quiet strength and gentle spirit. When the cowboys returned to the Double R Ranch in early October, Sarah was waiting on the porch of the main house, wiping her hands on her apron. The moment she saw James ride through the gate, her face lit up with a smile so radiant it made his chest ache. He barely took time to unsaddle his horse before he was striding toward her, and then she was in his arms, and nothing had ever felt so right. "I missed you," he murmured into her hair, holding her close and breathing in the scent of cinnamon and vanilla that always clung to her from her baking. "I counted every day," Sarah whispered back, her arms tight around his waist. "Welcome home, James." True to his word, James courted Sarah properly over the following weeks. On Sundays, their day off, he would borrow a buggy and take her into town or on rides through the countryside. They attended church together, walked along the creek that ran through the eastern part of the ranch property, and spent hours talking about everything under the sun. James was a perfect gentleman, but the attraction between them was undeniable, simmering just beneath the surface of every touch and glance. He continued to serve her plate first at every meal, a ritual that had become sacred between them. But now he also brought her small gifts, wildflowers picked on his rides, a pretty ribbon from the general store, a book of poetry he thought she might enjoy. Sarah, who had spent so long believing she was only valuable for what she could do for others, slowly began to understand that James valued her simply for who she was. "Tell me about your husband," James said one Sunday afternoon as they sat by the creek, their feet dangling in the cool water. It was November now, but Texas was still warm, the sun bright overhead. If you want to talk about it, I want to know all of you, Sarah, even the painful parts. Sarah was quiet for a long time, watching the water flow past. Thomas was not a bad man, she said finally. But he was not a good husband. He married me because he needed someone to keep house and cook his meals. I do not think he ever loved me, and I know I did not love him. I was 18 and alone after my aunt died, and marriage seemed like my only option. We had 2 years together before the cholera took him, and I grieved more for the life I never had than for the man himself. James took her hand, lacing their fingers together. You deserve so much more than that, Sarah. You deserve someone who loves you desperately, who would do anything to make you happy, who sees you as a partner and not a servant. Someone like you, Sarah asked, turning to look at him with hope and vulnerability shining in her dark eyes. Exactly like me, James confirmed, lifting her hand to his lips and kissing her knuckles gently. I love you, Sarah Mitchell. I have loved you since the day I pulled you out of the path of that bullet. I love your strength and your kindness and the way you hum when you are cooking. I love how you always save the burnt biscuits for yourself instead of serving them to the men. I love everything about you, and I want to spend the rest of my life making sure you know how precious you are. Tears streamed down Sarah's face, but she was smiling through them. I love you too, James. You have shown me what it means to be valued, to be cherished. You have healed parts of me I did not even know were broken. James cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears. May I kiss you? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. Please, Sarah whispered, and then his lips were on hers, tender and sweet and full of promise. It was her first real kiss, the first time she had been kissed by someone who truly loved her, and it felt like coming home after a long journey. They pulled apart slowly, their foreheads resting together as they caught their breath. Marry me, James said, the words spilling out with urgent honesty. I know we have not been courting long by traditional standards, but I am sure, Sarah, I have never been more sure of anything. Marry me and let me spend the rest of my life putting you first. Sarah laughed, a sound of pure joy that rang out across the water. Yes, she said firmly. Yes, I will marry you, James Thornton, 1,000 times yes. They were married in December in the small church in Redemption, with the entire ranch turning out to celebrate. Sarah wore a new dress of deep green wool that James had insisted on buying for her, and he wore his best suit with a string tie and polished boots. Robert Richardson gave Sarah away, having grown fond of the young woman who had brought such excellent cooking and quiet efficiency to his household. The other cowboys served as groomsmen, whooping and cheering when James kissed his bride at the altar. The ranch hands had pooled their money and built James and Sarah a small cabin on the edge of the ranch property as a wedding gift, a cozy 2-room structure with a stone fireplace and real glass windows. It was modest but perfect, a home of their own where they could build their life together. Their wedding night was tender and passionate, James taking his time to show Sarah what it meant to be loved by a man who truly cherished her. He worshipped her body with his hands and mouth, patient and gentle as he guided her through new experiences, always putting her pleasure before his own. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in their marriage bed, Sarah cried again, overwhelmed by the realization that this was her life now, that she was truly loved and valued. What is wrong, sweetheart? James asked in concern, pulling her closer against his chest. Nothing is wrong, Sarah assured him, kissing over his heart. Everything is so right it frightens me. I keep waiting to wake up and find this was all a dream. This is real, James promised, tilting her face up so she could see the truth in his eyes. I am real, this is real, and I am never going anywhere. You are stuck with me now, Mrs. Thornton. Good, Sarah said fiercely, because I am never letting you go. Sarah continued to cook for the ranch hands even after her marriage, though now she and James walked to the main house together each morning and back to their cabin each evening. The routine of serving her plate first continued, a daily reminder of how their love had begun. The other cowboys had adopted the practice too. making sure Sarah always ate first and always had the best portions, a sign of their respect and affection for the woman who took such good care of them. Their first year of marriage was full of joy and discovery as they learned each other's rhythms and built their life together. James proved to be an attentive and loving husband, always thinking of Sarah's needs and happiness. He taught her to ride horses better, taking her on long rides across the ranch on her days off. She taught him to bake bread, laughing as flour dusted his dark hair white. They made love often, the passion between them only growing stronger as their emotional intimacy deepened. In the spring of 1883, Sarah realized she was pregnant. She told James one evening after supper as they sat on the porch of their cabin, watching the sun set over the plains. His reaction was everything she could have hoped for, pure joy and wonder as he pulled her into his arms and held her close. "A baby," he whispered, his hand already moving to rest protectively on her still flat stomach. "Our baby. Sarah, you have made me the happiest man alive." "I am scared," Sarah admitted. "My mother died giving birth to my younger brother. What if something goes wrong?" James held her tighter. "Nothing is going to go wrong. We will get the best doctor and I will be right there with you every step of the way. You are strong, Sarah. You are going to be an amazing mother." His confidence helped ease her fears, and as the months passed and her belly grew round with their child, Sarah found herself excited rather than afraid. James was attentive to the point of being comical, barely letting her lift anything heavier than a wooden spoon. The ranch hands treated her like precious china, constantly offering to help with any task. Robert Richardson even hired a temporary cook to help take the load off Sarah as her pregnancy advanced. In November of 1883, during a fierce rainstorm that battered the Texas plains, Sarah went into labor. James stayed by her side through all of it, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, whispering encouragement even as his heart pounded with fear. The local doctor and midwife worked efficiently, and after 12 hours of hard labor, Sarah delivered a healthy baby boy with a lusty cry and a full head of dark hair like his father. "He is perfect," James said in awe, tears streaming down his face as he held his son for the first time. "You are perfect. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for this incredible gift." They named him William James Thornton, calling him Will from the start. He was a beautiful baby, healthy and strong, and both parents fell completely in love with him from the first moment. James proved to be a devoted father, getting up for middle-of-the-night feedings, changing diapers without complaint, and spending every free moment holding his son and staring at him in wonder. Sarah continued to cook for the ranch, though now with the help of an assistant, a young woman named Mary who had recently moved to town. She brought Will with her to the kitchen, setting up a cradle near the warm stove where she could keep an eye on him while she worked. The Cowboys all doted on the baby, taking turns making silly faces to get him to smile. And James continued his ritual of serving Sarah's plate first, now with the added joy of also preparing small portions of mashed vegetables for Will once he was old enough to eat solid food. Life was good, better than either James or Sarah had ever imagined possible. They had a home, a family, work they found meaningful, and most importantly, they had each other. Their love continued to deepen with each passing year, weathering the small storms that came their way with communication and mutual respect. When Will was 2 years old, Sarah became pregnant again. This time, she was less afraid, confident in her body's ability to bring new life into the world. Their daughter, Elizabeth Ann, was born in the spring of 1886, a tiny thing with her mother's dark eyes and a sweet temperament. Will was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything from fetching diapers to singing her lullabies. James expanded their cabin, adding 2 bedrooms so the children could have their own spaces as they grew. He had been promoted to foreman of the Double R Ranch, a position that came with better pay and more responsibility. Sarah reduced her cooking duties to focus more on raising their children, though she still provided meals for the ranch hands a few times a week, always with James serving her plate first. The years passed in a rhythm of work and family, seasons and celebrations. Will grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved helping his father with the horses. Elizabeth was bright and curious, constantly asking questions and getting into everything. In 1889, Sarah gave birth to another son, Thomas, named after her late first husband in a gesture of peace with her past. Thomas was a happy, easy baby who rarely cried and seemed content just to observe the world around him. Their cabin was full of life and laughter, the home Sarah had always dreamed of but never believed she would have. James was everything she could have wanted in a husband and more, a true partner who shared the work of raising their children and never took her for granted. He still made sure she ate first at every meal, still brought her wildflowers for no reason, still told her he loved her every single day. In the summer of 1890, Robert Richardson passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 73. He left the Double R Ranch to James in his will, having no children of his own and seeing James as the son he had never had. It was an overwhelming responsibility, but also an incredible opportunity. James and Sarah suddenly found themselves owners of one of the most successful cattle ranches in Texas. They rose to the challenge together, as they did everything. James managed the cowboys and the cattle operations, while Sarah handled the household accounts and continued to provide meals for the hands, now as their employer rather than a fellow worker. They were fair and generous bosses, treating their employees well and earning loyalty and hard work in return. The ranch prospered under their management, growing and expanding over the years. They built a larger house for their growing family, though they kept the original cabin as a guest house, too attached to the memories they had made there to tear it down. Sarah finally had the large kitchen she had always dreamed of, with a modern cast-iron stove and plenty of counter space. James made sure there was a breakfast nook with windows facing east, so Sarah could watch the sunrise while she had her morning coffee. Their children grew up strong and healthy, surrounded by love and the wide-open spaces of the Texas plains. Will learned ranching from his father and proved to have a natural talent for working with horses. Elizabeth was smart as a whip and dreamed of becoming a teacher. Thomas was still young but showed signs of being the most adventurous of the three, always exploring and getting into harmless mischief. On their 10th wedding anniversary in December of 1893, James surprised Sarah with a trip to San Antonio, their first real vacation away from the ranch. They left the children with trusted friends in town and spent a week exploring the city, eating at restaurants, visiting the Alamo, and simply enjoying being together without the constant demands of ranch life and parenthood. One evening, as they strolled along the San Antonio River in the warm twilight, James stopped and pulled Sarah into his arms. "Do you remember what I said to you the day I asked you to marry me?" He asked, his eyes soft as he looked at his wife, who was even more beautiful to him now than she had been as a young widow of 22. "You said you wanted to spend the rest of your life making sure I knew how precious I was," Sarah replied, her arms coming up to circle his neck. "I have tried to do that every single day," James said seriously. "Have I succeeded? Are you happy, Sarah?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but they were the good kind, the kind that came from a heart so full it overflowed. "I am happier than I ever imagined possible," she said honestly. "You gave me everything I never knew I needed. A home, a family, a love that never wavers. You taught me that I was worthy of being put first, of being cherished. You saved my life that day in town, James, but you also saved my soul. I love you more today than I did 10 years ago, and I will love you even more tomorrow." James kissed her deeply, not caring that they were in public or that people might be watching. "You are my everything, Sarah Thornton," he murmured against her lips. "My partner, my love, the mother of my children, the keeper of my heart. I will serve your plate first for the rest of our lives, and it still would not be enough to show you how much you mean to me." They held each other as the sun set over San Antonio, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. The scared young widow who had believed she was only valuable for what she could do for others had become a confident woman who knew she was loved for who she was. The drifting cowboy who had never let himself want anything had become a devoted husband and father with deep roots and a purpose. The years continued to pass, bringing the joys and challenges that every life holds. There were hard times, droughts that tested the ranch's resources, illnesses that frightened them, the normal struggles of raising children and running a business. But through it all, James and Sarah faced everything together, their love the foundation that kept them strong. They added to their family one more time in 1895, welcoming another daughter they named Rose for the wild roses that grew along the creek where James had first told Sarah he loved her. Rose was a sweet, gentle child who seemed to carry sunshine with her wherever she went, and she completed their family perfectly. As their children grew into young adults, James and Sarah watched with pride as they became good people who contributed to their community. Will took over more and more of the ranch operations, showing the same steady leadership his father possessed. Elizabeth did indeed become a teacher, opening a school in Redemption where she taught children of all backgrounds. Thomas eventually left for college in Austin, wanting to study law and make his mark in the changing world of the late 19th century. Through all the changes and all the years, one thing remained constant. Every single day, at every single meal, James served Sarah's plate first. It was more than a ritual now. It was a symbol of their love story, a reminder of where they had begun and how far they had come. The simple act of putting food on his wife's plate before anyone else's, of making sure she was cared for before he saw to his own needs, had become as natural to James as breathing. The ranch hands who worked for them, many of whom had been hired long after the tradition began, learned quickly that Mrs. Thornton always ate first. It was just how things were done at the Double R Ranch, a sign of the respect and love the owners had for each other. New cowboys would sometimes ask about it, and the old-timers would smile and tell the story of how the boss had fallen in love with the cook by making sure she never went hungry again. In the spring of 1902, James and Sarah celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary surrounded by their children, grandchildren from Will who had recently married, and friends from all over Texas. It was a grand party held at the ranch, with music and dancing and enough food to feed an army. Sarah had cooked for days leading up to it, unable to resist being involved even though they had hired help for the event. As the sun set, and the party continued under strings of lanterns hung throughout the yard, James led Sarah away from the crowd to the porch of the main house. From there, they could see their original cabin in the distance, the place where their married life had truly begun. 20 years, James marveled, his arm around Sarah's waist as she leaned against him. They were both in their 40s now, their hair touched with gray, their faces lined with years of laughter and occasional sorrow. But the love between them was as strong as ever, perhaps even stronger for having weathered 2 decades of life together. 20 years of you putting me first, Sarah said softly, turning to look up at her husband. 20 years of you showing me every single day that I am loved and valued. Do you know what an incredible gift that is, James? It is nothing compared to the gift you have given me, James replied, kissing her forehead gently. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. You gave me everything I had been searching for without even knowing I was looking for it. Serving your plate first is the least I can do to show you what you mean to me. Sarah reached up and cupped his face in her hands, these hands that had cooked thousands of meals, raised 4 children, worked alongside him to build a life and a legacy. We did this together, she said firmly. Everything we have built, we built together. You are my equal partner, James, not my servant. You know that, do you not? I know, James assured her, covering her hands with his own. But that does not mean I will ever stop making sure you are cared for first. It is who I am, Sarah. It is how I love you." Tears glistened in Sarah's eyes as she pulled him down for a kiss that tasted of 20 years of love, of partnership, of a commitment that had never wavered. When they finally pulled apart, they stood wrapped in each other's arms, watching their children and grandchildren celebrate below them. The legacy of their love made manifest in these people who existed because two lonely souls had found each other in a dusty Texas cattle town. The years continued to unfold gently for James and Sarah. They grew old together, their hair turning silver, their bodies moving a bit slower but their love never dimming. They became the heart of not just their ranch but of the entire Redemption community, known for their generosity, their fairness, and the obvious devotion they had for each other. James eventually passed the ranch operations fully to Will, content to spend his days working in the garden with Sarah, playing with his growing number of grandchildren, and taking rides across the land he loved with the woman who had made it all meaningful. Sarah reduced her cooking to making meals just for the two of them, though she still occasionally prepared her famous pies for church socials and family gatherings. Even in their 70s, living in a new century that brought automobiles and electric lights and changes neither could have imagined in their youth, James served Sarah's plate first at every meal. His hands shook a bit more with age, his movements were slower, but the intention was the same as it had been that first evening in 1882, when he had handed a confused young widow a full plate and told her she deserved to eat first. Sarah would watch him with eyes full of love and gratitude, this man who had kept his promise to spend the rest of his life making sure she knew how precious she was. And every time she took that first bite of food he had served her, she remembered the woman she had been before James, the woman who had believed she was only valuable for what she could do for others. James had taught her that she had inherent worth, that she deserved to be loved and cherished simply for existing. They had built an extraordinary life together from humble beginnings. They had raised 4 children who were good people making their own marks on the world. They had created a successful ranch that provided livelihoods for dozens of families. They had contributed to their community in countless ways. But more than any of that, they had loved each other deeply and well, creating a partnership that had weathered everything life threw at them. On a warm spring evening in 1925, James and Sarah sat on the porch of their home, holding hands as they watched the sunset paint the Texas sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold. They were both in their late 60s now, their bodies marked by time but their spirits still vibrant. Around them, their children and grandchildren played in the yard, the sound of laughter and joy filling the air. "We did good, didn't we?" James said quietly, squeezing Sarah's hand gently. "We did better than good," Sarah replied, squeezing back. "We built something beautiful, something that will last long after we are gone. Our children know what real love looks like. They have seen us put each other first every day of their lives. That is a legacy worth having." James turned to look at his wife, this woman who had been his whole world for more than 40 years. Even now, with lines on her face and silver in her hair, she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "I would do it all again," he said with absolute certainty. "Every single moment, every challenge, every joy, I would choose you every time, Sarah." "And I would choose you," Sarah replied, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "Every single time I would choose you." As the sun finally set, and the stars began to appear in the vast Texas sky, James and Sarah sat together in the peaceful quiet, surrounded by the life they had built and the love that had made it all possible. The cowboy who had noticed a young widow never ate until everyone finished, who had started serving her plate first always, had done more than save her from hunger. He had shown her what it meant to be truly loved, to be valued, to be cherished. And in doing so, he had found his own salvation, his own purpose, his own home. Their love story, born from a simple act of compassion and care, had become something legendary in Redemption. People told it to their children and grandchildren as an example of what real love looked like, How it was built not on grand gestures but on daily choices to put your partner first, to see them and value them and care for them. The story of how James always served Sarah's plate first became a symbol of devotion that inspired others to love better, to care more deeply, to see the needs of those they loved and meet them without being asked. Years later, after both James and Sarah had passed peacefully in their sleep within months of each other, unable to bear being apart for long, their children found a letter James had written to Sarah on their 50th wedding anniversary. In it, he had written words that captured the essence of their entire relationship. "You never asked to be put first, which is precisely why you deserve it. Every time I serve your plate before my own, I am reminded that loving you is the greatest privilege of my life. You are my first thought in the morning, my last thought at night, and the purpose behind every breath in between. Thank you for letting me love you, for teaching me what it means to be loved in return, and for building this extraordinary life with me. You will always eat first in our home because you will always come first in my heart." The letter became a treasured family heirloom, passed down through generations of Thorntons, a reminder of where they came from and the kind of love that had founded their family. And in the small town of Redemption, Texas, for years to come, when couples got married at the local church, it became a tradition for someone to whisper to the groom that he should always serve his wife's plate first, keeping alive the legacy of a cowboy and a widow who had found healing and happiness in each other's arms on the wild Texas plains so many years before.